Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. I've got Christopher Demetrakos here, and he is the founder and CEO of Manzanita KK. He's over in Japan, and welcome to the show.
Thanks so much.
Yeah,
Pleasure to be here.
we're going to talk a lot about a lot of different stuff. Let's go right into it. Cognitive science, neuroscience. What is your company doing?
We actually are a neuroscience-based marketing company, like consultancy. And so what we've discovered is that, so we call it Gen 3. Gen 1 is Don Draper, pre-digital. Gen 2 is basically where everybody is now.
Yeah,
And that's analytics and a big idea and intuition-based stuff. And it's all really based on
yeah,
liking,
yeah.
because if everybody likes
Oh,
it, then it runs.
interesting.
We do what we call Gen 3. And Gen 3 is, rather than aiming at liking, we aim at resonance, because we know that when two neurochemicals are released simultaneously, that is when people take action. And so if you aim a message that's in alignment with their psychological traits, you can actually cause that resonance response. And how do we know that? Because you can detect it with a smartwatch. That's Paul
Uh,
Zach's work, and we can talk about Paul Zach for a minute. Yeah, that's what
Paul
we do.
Zach. How do you spell his name?
ZAK.
Z-A-K.
ZAK. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
He's the top neuroscientist. He's in the top 0.3% of scientists, and so we're collaborating now. And he's a good dude, top
Okay,
shelf bloke.
that's very interesting. A lot we can go into there. So what is so it's just a smartwatch. I imagine it's not only a smartwatch, although it's probably related to what Meta recently did when they've released their glasses, and along with the glasses, they have a watch, and that watch is reading neural brain patterns. So is that probably what they're using, or is it like?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's a good question.
Mhm.
Not exactly. It's not reading. It's basically again, this is Paul Zach's stuff.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
isn't
yeah,
our stuff. But
yeah.
what Paul's doing is called immersion. And it's when this resonance response happens of a dopamine oxytocin release in the brain, that communicates through the cranial nerve to the heart, which will affect heart rate variability. And when heart rate variability establish itself in a certain pattern, that is indicative of that particular response. And so what that means is we don't have to ask consumers questions anymore.
Mm.
We have them look at a stimulus and it happens or it doesn't. We don't need to know what social channels they're on or if they bought Nikes in the last week or any of that stuff. Pretty
So what have
amazing
you learned
era.
about language from this? Because, well, I guess you said Gen 2 was all about liking. So it's a simple, just like a click that, oh, they like that, or they have that reaction, they have that. But I'm sure a lot of marketing was also asking people what they felt and what they think. And when humans talk and when when they're prompted like an LLM, oftentimes they go off into crazy worlds where it's not really related to the question, or they make up stories and they do all the things. What have you learned about the way that people talk and how that's different from their body's reaction?
Oh, you mean like chocolate ice cream? Or shoelaces? No, I'm just yeah, okay, just
Yeah, yeah,
just rolling
yeah,
rolling with
yeah,
the theme.
yeah.
What we know is that the conscious mind does not have access to emotional non-conscious experience. I'll give you an example. Emily Falk is a researcher at Penn, University of Pennsylvania, which is basically the center of the universe for behavioral science. She did a really interesting study where she put 30 people in the magnet, showed them three versions of a commercial, and said, rank them in order of effectiveness. Well, their non-conscious midbrains resonated with version C, followed by B, followed by A. When they ran the commercial in various markets around the United States, sure enough, version C was the highest performer. But what came out of their mouths? Version C was the worst, according to their perception.
Yeah.
Leonard Van Brussel did the same thing with fund managers, like hedge fund guys. 20 of them showed them stock memos, said pick the winners. Their midbrain, their non-conscious midbrain, resonated with a subset of stocks that outperformed the market, but out of their mouths came phantasmagoria.
So how does that relate to action? So these fund managers, because they're, well, I mean, there's the sense that we have as a modern civilization that at least some subset of the population is competent. But then, particularly given the last few years, it feels like there's also a case to be made that no one is competent. We're all just running around with our heads cut off. And there could be, like, it could be just political changes that make that so there are competent people, but they're not in positions of power. So how does the action relate to the fact that the midbrain knows what's true, and the verbal linguistic, the who we think we are, because that's who we think we are, right? We think that we're
Yeah.
this vision language matrix thing that's seeing everything and reacting. That's who we think we are, but then we have all these other things going on behind the scenes that's who we really are. So how
Yeah.
does that relate to action and like the competence?
Yeah, good. That's a good question. Oh, so Paul's original research was sponsored by DARPA, which is the
Mm.
experimental arm of the Pentagon, and they wanted to know, we'd like to stop using, let's just say, threatening persuasive techniques to get people to take
Sure.
action or
Yeah.
talk or give up some information, whatever that is. And so that actually prompted the research. And so he discovered, after I think it was 20,000 blood draws, that, yeah, okay, these are the two key neurochemicals
Mm.
that relate to action. But only 5% of your cognition is conscious. That's the entirety of your waking experience. 5%. So what else is the rest of it? It's all the housekeeping stuff. It's all of the, if you talk to Sapolsky at Stanford, if you talk to Talia Wheatley at Dartmouth, or even Sam Harris, I mean, these people will convince you that we have no free will at all, none, zero, right?
Yeah.
They're from that
Yeah.
camp. There's a
Yeah.
growing faction
Yeah.
in neuroscience these days. So how
But
does
it's
it
not true.
relate
We
to
have we have
action?
we have 5%. We have 5% sort of connection at least. I
Conscious.
wouldn't say free
Yeah.
will, but we do have something in there, basically.
Yeah. I mean, there's like Paul would knock me out for talking about this, but like Benjamin Libet did the studies of how you can detect that decisions are made seconds before
Yeah.
the conscious
Yeah.
awareness of
Yeah.
these,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
people are saying, oh no, it's not true, debunking. But I mean, there are more and more of these types of studies that are coming out. And so clearly there's something going on. Now, when it goes up to executive function,
Mm.
then that's a different story of, all right, well, contextually, I'm going to make a conscious decision. I can basically veto, or I can agree with
Mm.
whatever I'm feeling or prompted to do, which action to take.
So, and I want to get into what you guys are actually doing, but that gave me another question, which is that in scientific studies, there's always the thing that they're studying, and then there's the whole like reality as it is and how the study connects to the overall reality. What I want to understand is if somebody waits to make a decision, like
Yeah.
say that they don't actually make a decision, is there any change in terms of that, wanting to think on it? I guess that comes into the system one and system two
Hmm.
from, I forget his name, Kahneman.
Kahneman, Daniel
Yeah.
Kahneman. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. And so what about like waiting? I guess what have you learned personally about how to make good decisions from knowing all this?
Right. It causes an examination, obviously, of, I really want to do this. And then through this work, I find myself asking my own, I'm like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
wait, why am I so driven to this? For example, you can be, so some of my tech guys are on Bumble and the other apps and all that, and so we have these conversations a lot. In fact, we have a design for how to solve population problems,
Yeah. Great.
which we can get into that,
Yeah.
in a bit. But
Yeah.
it's like, well, what's your decision tree on whether to swipe one way or the other?
Yeah. God.
And it's a really fascinating
Yeah.
conversation, because a lot of times it's like, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just,
It's just,
I don't know, right?
yeah, and particularly in this realm because it's so primal. It's like so primal, and we have all these ideas and we have all these stories, and they're all just bullshit when it comes down to it. particularly in this
Yeah.
realm. I mean, I guess it relates to other things like food and but this feels like the most, the most basic, the thing that connects us all with all other animals, reproduction, food,
Hmm.
water, and shelter. Like
Yeah.
but and so in this realm, it's like very like this. I imagine that the stories don't really match
Yeah.
the actions, basically.
Right. Right.
Because and then there's
Yeah.
this.
I mean,
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
recently this
Yeah.
study came out. I was listening. Who was I? Who was I listening to? I don't remember who I was listening to. They were saying that the reported, basically self-reporting is just
Yeah.
out the window,
Yeah.
wholesale out the window. Forget about self-reporting.
Yeah.
You ask people, okay, what are your priorities in a mate? And they're going to say a whole laundry list of things about, dependable and
Yeah.
on and on and on. But when they actually tested this, and again, I don't know the methodology or any of that, but when they tested them for non-conscious drive for whatever these traits were that they were measuring, sex was top of the list for both genders,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. 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 Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah. Man, that's hilarious. Well, let's go right into that.
right.
So, reproduction,
So,
like, let's talk about the problem first. It's so interesting because for the last 100 years, everybody a lot of the people inside of elite circles were like, this is going to be too many people. Like, we've got to start doing things. And then, the whole eugenics thing came up, and it's just like, whoa. Then the strange irony at which we sit that for some reason isn't really known, although the awareness of it is, and you're in a country where it's most particularly happening. And I feel like, based on what we were talking about before, that it's like now it's like the after effects are clear. Like now there is a lot more immigration coming to Japan. Like we have a demographic crisis. Most countries in the world. In Argentina, I'm actually really love Argentina because Argentina has the same problem, but they stopped having kids much later. So actually, you see young people everywhere. Like but we're headed for the children of men scenario unless something changes. And Russia's been trying to change it. So Russia's been trying to incentivize people with money in order to have kids, and they just sent all of their young men to war. So it feels like it's going to get a lot worse both there and Ukraine. But what's your guys' plan to change this? Actually, let's start first with what. So that was Paul Zach's work. What are you guys doing specifically based on that work?
right. Okay. So what we're doing that's complementary to what Paul's doing. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So Paul has immersion. That you can think of that. It's actually an interesting story when he's the Tom Cruise of my field, and so when the Tom Cruise of your field says, "Hey, do you have time for a meeting?" It's like,
Yes. Yeah.
you're asking me.
Yeah.
So I used to work in the movie industry when I was in at the big advertising agency, and so I met tons of celebrities, but I was actually starstruck, that notwithstanding. So anyway, Paul said, "Hey, look, we've got this thing," and he does work with movie studios, and they send him, for example, three versions of a movie trailer. He'll test it with the smartwatch and say,
Uh,
"Okay, yeah, version
uh,
two seems to have the highest levels of resonance. So run that one. Okay, great." And of course, I said to him, "Wow, that's really great technology, Paul, but there are two problems with it." And he was like, "Yeah, I knew it," right? First problem is that it doesn't take into consideration the variance across the population because everybody's different,
yep. Yep. Yep.
right? Considering everybody the same is basically thinking like an economist. And of course, no shade on Paul. He is a neuroeconomist, actually, in
Interesting.
technical.
No
That's his
economist.
is
Yeah.
his PhD. And so the second issue is that it doesn't tell you what to make in the first place. So they're going to be pulling ideas out of their asses
Yeah.
saying, okay, let's send these three ideas that we think our opinions are that these are going to be good. Let's send them up to Paul and have him test those. And he's like, I knew it. But you solved this, right? And I said, yes, we solved that. So when you can think of our tech as the diagnostic tool, and you think of his tech, the smartwatch tech, as the prognostic tool.
Hmm.
Now, what we do is we know that if you are resonant, meaning you have something as basic as introversion, extroversion.
Hmm. Hmm.
We had a client that sells spirits, um, and everything they did was, it's like, well, our whiskey's about moments, and even their target was defined as upwardly mobile socials and this and that. And so it's all about socials. It's all about being together. It's all about these moments together. So unsurprisingly, all of their ads were extroverted. We figured out that more than half, this is Japan, more than half of their audience was introverted. We simply changed the messaging and we didn't use any paid ads at all. We raised their revenue by 56% in 3 months. No paid ads, no
Ah,
media budget
beautiful.
at all.
Yeah.
And so all we did was we unlocked the introverts. Now, the issue is, well, wait a minute, how could this be possible? Is it that they see the extroverted message and they don't like it? No, it's that they don't even see the extroverted message
Right.
because
Yeah.
of the strongest, most powerful ad blocker in the world, which is called the reticular activating system, which removes more than 99% of reality. So we read the cognitive traits of the audience, we offer up the total addressable market and exactly how to trigger them.
Yeah, it's super interesting and lines up with my own investigations, not through neuroscience, but just trying to understand who I am and like this small self-referential activity that is constantly going, that speaks in words and sees visions, like that small percent of who I am. I know there's other things out there, but I'm only seeing the 99% of reality. So I have to be kind of accept that that's happening. So I love that you said the reticular activation system is the thing, and I'm going to go do much more research on that later.
Mhm.
So now we got the 1%, so we can align a message with that 1% so that people actually see it, which is cool. Then there's the traditional advertising, probably that system two that you were talking about, not system two, the version two that you were talking about,
Yeah, yeah,
wanting to make influence. So if people can see it, then they can be influenced.
yeah.
How is that? How do you see that changing the system two in terms of that actual influencing?
Right. So when something, first of all, you're anything that isn't resonant with you, you're not going to see anyway. Can you hear that?
No,
No?
no.
Oh, awesome. All right. Sorry. Okay.
I thought it was fun. That was
Ambulance. All
fun.
right.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny because we're talking about
No, no,
this.
no, no.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah.
Okay, okay, okay. Good. All right. Um, shit. Where was I?
Anything
Okay,
that's
okay,
not
okay, okay.
resonant with the
So
system.
yeah, yeah. All right. Let's say that you're at a cocktail party. You can't hear any conversations around you until someone from across the room says, "Hey, Stuart," and you heard that when you heard nothing else. That's your RAS making a snap decision
Mm,
to let that into your brain because it's highly, highly relevant. So we do the same thing with messaging in that if it's resonant, in other words, in alignment with who they are, for example, openness, let's stick with personality. High openness people, they crave novelty, they crave abstraction, they crave new experiences. It relates at point 0.6 to IQ. Another way to say that is need for cognition, right? So they're thinkers, and sorry, Simon Sinek, these people do need the gigahertz and gigabytes like you. You're massively high openness, right?
mm,
They need to know, they need to get deep into the weeds of everything and need to know that stuff. Okay. So if I'm going to show you a message, it's going to stimulate your brain with vocabulary. It's going to
mm.
stimulate your brain with imagery. On the other side, now here's another thing. It correlates to creativity and liberal politics.
Yeah,
Conversely, if you get into low openness people, that's familiarity. Don't show
yeah,
me anything that
uh,
I don't know.
yeah,
I'm going to stick to just the things that I know. That correlates to conservative politics.
yeah. What about
Okay.
libertarians?
You got me. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know enough about that. I mean, I've been outside the United States for so long that you know, I honestly don't have
Yeah,
much
yeah,
to say.
yeah. Well,
But anyway,
yeah,
so
go for it.
if you want to, I mean, one reason why uh, these targets are defined so narrowly by ad agencies is because they can't target both. But using
Yes,
our
absolutely.
technology, which is a true diagnosis, it's a genuine diagnosis, then you can target both at the same time and you could run those messages at the same time because these people will not even see what's intended for them. And we've tested this over and over and over, and it's the
Uh,
same thing. It's like scrolling Instagram. right? You only
Yeah,
stop on what's relevant to you. You
yeah,
don't
yeah,
sit
yeah,
and watch
yeah,
every
yeah,
single
yeah,
thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Same principle. Yeah.
So this gets into media, which I've been loving talking about recently because it feels like the whole thing is collapsing. I'll give you my understanding of the media situation that we're in right now, and then feel free to pick holes in it, agree, disagree. So I've been reading about the 1500s and the printing press. And the printing press came out. Martin Luther was the first social media influencer. Before that, kings would basically have their small group of people and they would try to figure out what was going on. But basically, the peasants and everybody else who was just the feudal life didn't care. Well, couldn't care. There's just no option to be able to understand anything that's going out outside of your immediate local environment. Then the printing press came out. All of a sudden, you could have social media type of events where Martin Luther just starts talking bad about the church, and it creates chaos and controversy and war and all these different things. And then fast forward to the early 1900s, and we have radio. I was just reading this book about big science yesterday about the guy who is, but in the 1910s, I believe they had radio, but it couldn't carry voice signals, so it could only carry telegram, really, really basic information type of stuff. And then the 1920s, radio came out, and then all of a sudden you have FDR doing fireside chats, and all of a sudden this disembodied voice is inside of a radio, talking to every family in the home, and you have one small group of people that's allowed to transmit their message to millions and millions of people. Then the TV came around, and all of a sudden you have 5 channels that are transmitting not only voice but also images, and you have JFK winning the election. You have to be telegenic in order to become a politician. Then fast forward to social media, and we've got both of these things. We got cable news now allowing not the same degree when we only had 5 channels, but pretty like large viewing audiences. At the same time, you have the rise of social media, and the rise of social media was aligned with this growing the cable news thing until the point. So one thing would affect here in the social media, and it would immediately go to TV, and they would reverberate together. Now it feels like, particularly in the US, but I imagine it's a global phenomenon, that very few people, a lot less people are going to be paying attention to TV, and we only have the social media now. And it feels like it's going to fracture everyone's attention. And so going back to that, to what you were saying, do you agree with that it's going around? And how will this new media landscape change either your work or change what you think about the nature of reality?
Wow, that's a big question. The nature, the nature of reality. Uh, I think, we're a friend of mine called Dr. Augustine Fu. He's the top ad fraud guy
Oh,
in the world.
interesting.
And he got his PhD from MIT in applied chemistry. And he figured out that there's a certain number of eyeball minutes
Mm,
in the world on media, right? Social media or otherwise, to show ads. And you can actually max out, right?
mm,
Conceptually, you can max out the number of eyeball minutes, because how many ads can you serve
yeah.
in an hour if somebody's scrolling social media? How many hours per day are people even on that social
Mm,
media to begin with, or on the internet?
mm.
How many ads are possible to show? Now, that, according to him, that threshold was eclipsed in 2010.
Wait, what does that mean? What does that
There,
mean? The threshold
that
was
means that there
yeah.
are more ads out there being sold and delivered than human eyeballs could possibly watch or see, even if they were in front of a screen 24 hours a day.
Hence our attention apocalypse, where just nobody has any
Uh,
attention. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing, is that so in concert with that,
Mm,
it was about the same time someone came out with a figure that said we are in cognitive fatigue by
yeah.
noon
Yeah.
every single day.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that actually segues nicely into, have you ever heard of mouse utopia?
No, no.
This is really interesting. I forget the name of the researcher, but this was done in, I believe it was somewhere between 62 and 68, where a researcher took he either started with mice or rats and then switched to the other ones. But he took a habitat and put several mating pairs in this habitat, and it was disease free, had unlimited food and water, but it was just limited in
Yeah.
space.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And
I've heard of this. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and the hypothesis was the population would reach 3,000 and then start to decline, and then it would level out. But every single time the same pattern happened, and people can look this up, because
Yeah,
it's
that would
it's
be
a
great.
really fascinating. There's a video, but basically the punchline is that the population exploded, and then all of these weird
Yeah.
social
Yeah.
bizarre phenomena started happening, and then every single mouse died after that, right? And so the question becomes, and this is
Yeah, it goes
coming back
back.
to a long way around to your question,
Yeah.
which is perceiving reality and how is this going to affect us? So the conclusion to this is that it was social overstimulation
Whoa.
because mothers were starting to abandon their young because there are just too many options, there are too many people, there are too many dating apps, there's just we are in a constant state of the paradox of choice.
And that's not only social media. It feels like that started probably with the TV, that the overstimulation, but it's and cities. I wonder what cities have to do with it as well. And because my previous understanding of the demographic crisis is that we're headed there because of overabundance, like the mice. The mice have everything they want, and then the social stimulation that kind of agrees with my understanding is that we're headed like that we're not having kids because we're too prosperous. Well, okay, do you agree with that? Do you agree that like that's Japan? Like Japan became really prosperous and then they stopped having kids. South Korea stopped having kids. They became really prosperous. Do you think
Yeah.
that that's what's going on, or is it overdetermined?
I
That yeah,
My own hypothesis on this is that we have crack in our pocket. And in fact, there are more cell phones in Japan than there are people, because a lot of people have two, even three smartphones. When Pokemon Go was really popular,
yeah, yeah.
there's a hot spot right outside my office, and these guys and women too would walk around with the little like a board that had, I don't
Got
know,
multiple phones
12,
on it.
12 smartphones on it, and they're playing Pokemon Go on all of them because they wanted whatever prize. So here's the issue though, is that when you have access to porn in your pocket
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
instantly,
yeah,
anytime, your brain will interpret that as, oh, wow, here's sexual opportunity.
yeah,
And you can fire that up
and release it. Yeah,
anytime.
yeah,
And then, your nucleus accumbens is getting drowned in dopamine whenever you want, take care of business however you see fit.
yeah,
And that's an issue because in the old days, people had to seek out sexual opportunity.
yeah.
And now it's in your pocket, so to speak.
I'll
And
never forget
it's a
going
huge
to yeah,
problem.
yeah, yeah. I'll never forget going to India. This is probably in 2008, 2009, after smartphones had broken the economic gap into everyone having them.
Yeah.
And just like kids would come up to me and the Indian kids would show me the porn on their phone, and I was like, "Whoa, God, we're headed for territory that's
That's right.
interesting." So that's now happening globally. Anybody with a phone, no matter the education level, no matter the preparedness, no matter and so is there going to be, do you, an immune reaction to this? Because there's a couple, like taking what we're talking about going into the future, we're going now far off what you guys are doing into the future of humanity and the demographic crisis. And it feels like talking to young people, the Gen Z, first of all, it's highly divergent. So they're all over the place. They're like
Mhm.
they're going into these little like degrees of micro tribes that millennials can only imagine. And olders are just not even like it's like the reticular activation that you talked about. It's like I'm having the reticular activation and understanding the Gen Z. And so feels like there is an immune reaction to this world, this hyper attention world. And then we haven't even touched on LLMs and how the LLMs will play into everything you just talked about. Now, do you see that? And this could be related to your work as well, because I feel like we're headed into a media environment that's going to have a stark contrast between the last generations, and almost nobody sees it. As with every technology revolution, there's like people didn't really predict social media. None of the futurist books really talked about Facebook. They kind of talked about it, but there are no central books that went into what would happen if you connected computers together and then you connected everybody's emotions together into this cognitive, like it was always about the AI doing this, and it was we were all still individuals. And so what do you think about this? What do you think about the future? Are we headed into what's your kind of intuition about where we're headed into with this new media landscape and related to what you guys are doing? Because it almost sounds like with what you're doing, the version 2 was the scary, like that was the Brave New World 1984 type of world. And although it does feel like that in our current contemporary world, that's where it's headed, I think we're going to enter something very different. And what do you think about that?
I do too. I think
Yeah.
it's the immune response is a really good way to put it. It's the Butlerian jihad that's coming, to make a Dune reference. You have
Interesting. Yeah.
in the United States, you have groups of Gen Z who have completely abandoned matching apps, and they go to book clubs now to meet people.
Right.
And we're seeing that
Yeah.
here in
Yeah.
Japan to a
Japan,
certain degree
interesting.
as well, where like there's this really interesting app that it's only in Japanese, and it's called Gravity. And it came up during COVID, which was brilliant timing because everybody's locked up at home. And I saw this ad come up on Twitter, and it said, Yasashi SNS Gravity, and Yasashi means nice or polite, right? And SNS is a social network service. So it's like, this is the nice place. And I'm like, wow, okay, I'm down with
Hmm.
that. Let me
Yeah.
check this out. I'm
Yeah.
still I'm
Yeah.
still on it,
Yeah.
years later. And I
Cool.
absolutely love it because it's kind of the anti social
Yeah.
network,
Yeah. Yeah.
where
Yeah.
it's not about likes, it's not about views. People aren't posting crazy shit, and everyone's anonymous. Nobody uses their real name. Uh, and so, again, it's because of the backlash to this popular media. And here comes Facebook with their glasses, where that's just even more and yet more. And, we're going to augment reality. It's like, do we need to?
Hmm.
And so we're going to hit this, this mouse utopia type of limit. And everybody's just going to go, whoa, I've had enough, because the brain can only handle so much. And we're seeing
Yeah.
the rise of like Tamara, or any of these alternative communities.
Yeah.
Those are, I mean, I see new channels regarding these like alternative living arrangements just all the time popping up on the areas that I follow. Maybe it's my filter bubble, but that's I participated in. There was this think tank kind of a program that Margaret Atwood put on about Society 2.0, and there were 200 people around the world. So I was in the Asia time zone for this particular
Hmm.
thing, and our goal was to reimagine society. And there was a really interesting conundrum, and I'd love to run this by you,
Sure.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
A conversation happened that I ended up pissing some people off, as I do. And so it was mostly people in Australia because it was in English, but
Yeah.
there were two Chinese women, and I was the only like representative of Japan.
Yeah.
And so, we had a lot of people from down under, and I met, some brilliant, brilliant souls. And one woman was saying, we really need to get back to the first people's kind of ancient traditions and all of this stuff. And I said, well, okay, that's really interesting, because in the same sentence she had talked about authenticity, and you need to be who you are
Yeah.
and offer who you are and all that. And I said, you can't have those things together.
Yeah.
First of all, Japan China, you could say these are First Nations, like the
Oh,
Japanese,
yeah, yeah.
right? It's a 10,000-year-old society.
Whoa,
China goes back even further.
whoa.
So, okay, First Nations people. And plus Japan, I mean, you've been here.
Yeah,
Japan is a model society. You lose your wallet, you will get it back.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
That's how
I
crazy.
said, I said, let's do a thought experiment about authenticity versus the collectivism and ancient traditions of First Nations people. Since I don't know much about Aboriginals, let's go talk about the Native Americans. And my great grandmother is, so nobody freaks out. I'm also Native American. All right.
Yeah.
I said, let's imagine a movie about Native Americans where here's a brave who just went through the ritual to become a man and an adult, right? And he's got his guys around him and they're all congratulating him. And he says, hey, man, that chief, I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to be my own man. I'm going to go my own way. He
Yeah,
can
yeah,
kiss
yeah,
my ass,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
What do you think will happen to that guy? He's
Uh,
going to get his ass royally kicked,
or yeah, or
right?
put out in the woods and not taken back.
Let's transplant
Yeah.
this onto MS-13. Okay,
Oh,
somebody steps the
yeah,
notorious gang.
yeah.
Somebody steps out of line there. We know what's going to happen with them. So here you have arguably an ancient First Nations people, and they have this very strict, rigid code that you have to live by, and
Yeah.
you do not color outside the lines. So what's the answer to this? Do we go for authenticity and being ourselves in the new shape of society? Or do we have this rigid, constraining, conformist style of
Hmm.
groupthink? Which is it? And
Hmm.
they were angry. They were pissed.
Yeah.
Sorry about that if you're watching.
Yeah, well, no, I'm sure that me or my guests have already done that enough. There's probably an immune system on my audience who's we've only selected for the openness trait basically, which may be a problem. But so there's a tangent I want to go down later. But the what you just talked about is really interesting because it fits in with the Enlightenment and the Renaissance. And there's this great book called the Dawn to Decadence about the whole history of the Enlightenment, the Renaissance, and it's so much about the human and the individual, and those are things that don't exist in Japan or China, in my understanding. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong there, and maybe there is sort of like a sort of implantation of those things from the U.S. becoming a global power and kind of extending it, but I doubt that that's fully into the culture, fully into that First Nation. But the individual doesn't exist outside of Enlightenment cultures. Like it's just not something that is recognized in the same way that it wasn't really recognized in Rome. And so it feels like there's also an ending to that as well, because even in the United States now, the culture is sort of rejecting that at some levels, and in some levels, there's a fight against it. What do you think about that? Well, first of all, is that true? Like in Japan, is there any sort of recognition about the individual?
Yeah, it's Japan is a society. I don't know enough about China to comment on China,
Yeah,
but Japan is a society of concentric circles.
yeah, concentric
And there's
circles.
this whole concept of uchi and soto. Uchi means inside, soto means outside.
Whoa.
And so everybody is has just this innate sense of who's inside versus who's outside.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're talking about your company, then you need to really conform to the culture of your company, and it's constraining. And so you'll run into people who say, I just want to live in the United States so badly. I just want to live overseas so badly. And whenever you ask them,
Yeah,
the reason is they say, well, I can be myself.
yeah,
Well, why can't you be yourself here? Well, there's this, they feel, they
yeah,
do. I mean,
yeah,
I've
yeah.
been here
You
my
don't feel it. Yeah, yeah,
entire
yeah,
adult
yeah,
life. I
yeah.
still don't really feel it, but they feel this tremendous pressure because the consequence of stepping out of line is that you'll be effectively ostracized from whatever group you
Yeah,
happen to be in.
yeah,
And to them, that's a fate worse than arguably death. But yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, really interesting. How does it feel to be you there? Like, because I imagine that here in Argentina, I've done a lot of this. I lived in Thailand. I lived in, I've lived in Brazil. I've lived in a lot of different places, and I've been to China long enough to kind of get the immediate beginner sense feel of what it feels like there as well. And it um even in Argentina, it's so interesting because in Argentina, as we were talking about before the show, it's very open. You know, if I were to have kids in Argentina or Brazil, like just like in the US, they would be Argentine and Brazilian. There's no generation gap that needs to happen. They're fully into the culture. But if I wanted to be Argentine or Brazilian, I could do it. Like I just take like another 2 years, 3 years living here, I'd pick up on probably 99% of all the little eccentricities. But in Japan, it just can't happen. Like it's
Oh,
just not an option. Like and so
no.
can you talk more about but I imagine there's a freedom to it, right? Because in Argentina, as an expat right now, before I'm fully inundated in the culture, before I stop making all the little mistakes that I might make, just I'm outside the hierarchy. And I noticed that in Thailand. I was outside the hierarchy and it was great. You know, it's great. You're outside the hierarchy. You don't all the social rules that are so constraining, you don't feel it. It's not a part of your, but you also aren't included in the inner circle. What's your take on that? How do you feel about that?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So foreigners here are called gaijin, and gai is also soto, which means outside, jin being person, outside person, gaijin, right? Uh, when inevitably when people come here initially, maybe to work, have a year contract, whatever,
Yeah.
then you can play the gaijin card and say, hey, that doesn't apply to me, and and you kind of groove in your, to your own beat and all that. But the problem is that you're going to be constantly on the outside,
Yeah.
and you'll
Yeah.
never get the
Yeah.
benefits of
Yeah.
being in the inner circle. And conversely, there are those on the other extreme who, as we talked about before the show, they try too hard to get
Yeah.
on the
Yeah.
inside, believing that that's actually possible,
Yeah.
and they're, I mean, eating, rice and miso soup at every meal and sleeping in their kimonos and all of that. It's just, it's,
Wait, I have
you're
one
pushing.
question. Are there any who do actually play it out perfectly? Like don't make any mistakes? That'd be hard. It feels like it'd be really hard.
E- Even
Yeah.
if you do, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure there are.
The whole
I'm
thing
sure
is a
there are.
mistake. The whole thing is a mistake.
Yes,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
that's right. That's right.
Mhm.
That's right. Because I've been here. I mean, I enjoy a certain level of status
Yeah.
here as an insider, but it's still complete, total cognitive dissonance when people do find out that, wow, yeah, I am who I am, and
Yeah.
they just can't wrap their head around it. And everybody thinks, I walk into a restaurant and people speak English to me and they think I'm a tourist. It's like, yeah, okay, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. It
Not
doesn't
not
matter.
realizing that, I'm one of them,
And
but.
you could pay attention to their conversations. Does it ever happen where you actually understand what they're saying and they start speaking about you in
Yeah,
Japanese?
I'm bilingual.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm bilingual. Yeah.
but like, do you ever walk
Oh,
into
yeah.
somewhere? Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um, Japanese people tend to have a pretty high level of decorum and
yeah, yeah, yeah,
interpersonal
yeah,
sophistication,
yeah,
such that that wouldn't happen as often as it would, say, in what I imagine the U.S. to be
yeah.
now.
Or
Um,
China. China's a
it's
good
only
example. It
happened a
does
couple of
happen.
times.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. My
yeah.
Chinese friends have said that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. When I went to China, so Japan was the first language I learned, but then I tried to learn Chinese, and I went and spent a month in Shanghai in 2000,
Hmm.
2006. And there were a lot of African immigrants who were part of the whole
Hmm.
economic colonization of Africa. And one of them spoke perfect Chinese, and he would go in and just hear all the racist shit that they would be talking
Yeah.
about him, and
Yeah.
just wild. Okay, well, I don't want to go too far off of the really interesting stuff you talked about your company. So,
Yeah.
going forward, what are the milestones you're looking to hit for the company? Where are you taking it? What's going on right now? What are the next steps?
Yeah, actually, we're in a really amazing time. I've received quite a bit of interest from not just clients who are outside of Japan, because we can do this anywhere. So we'll be expanding pretty soon into the US, into some other markets that I'll be able to talk about shortly. But more exciting than that is that we have what I call the A team. We have some really, really mind-blowingly capable, talented people who are coming on board. And so we'll be doing a raise shortly to make sure that we're covered in all of this. But what's really going to happen is as the tech develops, right now we can analyze a total addressable market. We have a blueprint on how to essentially become the top player in any category. And what's interesting about that is how, because everybody's talking about be different, be the purple cow. Seth Godin's like, be super creative and differentiate yourself. It's like, no, 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 no. The category has certain elements within it that everyone adheres to, and that's how you need to be the same. Nobody talks about that. It's kind of like Bezos talking about, people always ask me what's going to change in 10 years. It's like, no, no, no. The better question is what's not going to change in 10 years,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
it's a better question for that.
By the same logic, it's like, okay, what's not different amongst the competitors within a certain category, right? I mean, shoes are always going to have the super, it's always going to be Nike, right? This Nike commercial. And there are certain elements that are germane to that particular category. So we have the ability to read those. We have the ability to cluster the audience into these cognitive clusters of people who have the same cognition, because that's how you get in. That's how you get past the RAS.
Mm,
And then that's how you trigger the resonance response that is detectable with a smartwatch. And
mm.
that is advertising success. That's the future. Okay. That's here. We can do that already. We're doing that already. This time next year, it'll be text to campaign.
What does that mean?
That means that I'll be able to, or any client will be able to just basically write a description for a new product. Because you
Oh,
talked
got
about
it.
P&G,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Text campaign.
72%
Yeah,
of all new products fail.
yeah,
And so this thing will do a McKinsey level business intelligence, go out,
yeah. Very
assess the
interesting.
market, and it will basically develop a campaign for you. The video, the imagery is all it's going to be there at this time next year. And ad agencies are basically screwed at this point. I
Yes, let's
really,
talk about the last 10 minutes.
yeah,
Let's talk about the connection to LLMs because you just made it
yeah,
quite clear the text to campaign, it's going to change so rapidly.
yeah.
And it's so hard to do anything because it's future shock. We got the future shock right here. And this is not future shock of the general population. This is future shock of any single entrepreneur who is trying to figure out like,
Yeah, yeah,
well, what do I do? Because this is like unlimited power, but at the same time, the foundational models are going to wipe in and come in and take 95% of whatever we can consider of doing. And
yeah.
then that other 5% is sort of niche markets, but which niche market is part of the thing that they're going to wipe out versus not. And then you're in an interesting position because you're outside of this in a very good position because you're in a traditional industry that is
Mhm.
going to change quite drastically. So let's ask you what is the change for the advertising? What is the current way that advertising works, and what are LLMs going to change about that?
There's a couple of takes. Okay,
Yeah,
there's my take, then there's the
yeah,
mainstream take. Let's
yeah.
just call it that. There's a popular sentiment out there that just let the machine handle it, right? The machine's going to figure it out. And I've noticed that this is just stunningly common amongst technologists. It's
Yes,
like,
it's
if
crazy.
I
It's
build the
crazy.
machine, it will figure it out
Yeah,
and it will make ads that are completely relevant,
yeah.
hyper personalized, and all that for whoever's going to see it. Now, of course, LLMs regress to a mean.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you have a human doing creative or you have a machine that has a prompt, it's, the machine's going to regress to the mean. And if you don't have a classification system, right, then obviously it's going to regress to the mean of liking. And that's no different from somebody thinking something up, showing it to the creative director, testing it in focus groups. Hey, did the client like it? Hey, he liked it. She liked it. Everybody liked it. Let's run it. It's all still very much based on liking, but the
Yeah,
machine will figure out how to make people like it better because of analytics, which is just overcorrection in one direction to the next, to the next, to the next. It's a lot of what, but no why.
mm,
Analytics. They clicked here, they didn't click there. Oh, okay. I just asked a really high level Japan Inc. data analyst dude who builds tools for his company. I said, okay, let's You've got a green button, 53%, click there. You've got a blue button, 47%, click there. What do you do? And he pointed at the green button. I said, you change all your buttons to green, don't you? And he goes, yeah. I said, you just alienated 40%, 47% of your audience. Okay.
So yeah, go for it. Yeah.
If you know their cognitive traits, so I'm getting to the punchline.
Yeah.
You'll really appreciate this. If you know their cognitive traits, then you can have a reactive system. It's not hard to do. If you understand that this is an introvert, that's an extrovert, you can show green versus blue. It's really easy to do. And he's just like, oh, wow, okay, yeah, I never thought of that. In advertising, it's always either or. It's this or that. It's never this and that. In Gen 3, it's always this and that. It's your cake and eating it too. Now we have a classification system, and my one of my engineers came to me recently and he said, "Hey boss, can we talk?" And I took him outside and we had a cup of coffee and he said, "I'm really worried that if we exit this company and sell to a big corporation that will be too much power concentrated in too few hands." And it's a legit concern because think about this, the jazz handsy world of advertising and all the pink Barbie stuff and creative ideas and all that, in one instant, via dopa-oxy, moves into purchase, which becomes revenue, which becomes earnings reports, which becomes shareholder value, which becomes the one thing that powers free markets. And now we have greater control over this than anyone ever has in history. That's a holy shit moment,
Yep.
right? And so LLMs powered by our technology will be able to sell anything to anybody.
Hmm.
And that's both an invigorating and disturbing thought all at the same time.
Yeah, because it really goes into the last 40, 50 years of history where the systems themselves have become so powerful and also not centralized, like centralized in a general sense, but not centralized in the sense that it's like one guy like Stalin or FDR kind of like moving and managing the whole thing. They're all in these things. And so this is the whole singularity. This is the Nick Land. Are you familiar with Nick Land? Yeah. So for my listeners, Nick Land is the philosophical background to accelerationism. And his central take that I don't think people understand about accelerationism is that accelerationism is all about this. The capital is going to be this thing that essentially escapes human interaction and starts being run by its own laws, its own inertia outside of human goals. And so Land wants to accelerate it all so that it will collapse, or he gives the philosophical understanding of why that's important to do. And so that capitalism itself will collapse. And you read a lot of Marx, and he's like, this is his feeling of the end game for capital. So yeah, very interesting. The where this is headed, and um, it gets to the nature of that free will, that 5%. Do you think so? You said sell anything to sell to anybody. Where does that 5% rest in that equation of we have this, we do have an understanding of conscious sense, the self-knowledge. Where does self-knowledge fit into that? Like, is there a protection? Is there like, and what I've also been thinking about, the reticular activation you talked about. This is why we hate advertisements, because it's not targeted to us. So there's a benefit to this in the sense that we'll actually see things that we want, but it really hits to that nature of who we are. And I guess this is also, maybe there's an acceleration. I'm going far out here, but maybe there's an accelerationism of self-knowledge that we need, because ultimately I am under the impression that we're most of what happens in the universe is for our benefit, and that there is a good with a capital G that the Greek philosophers talked about, and the spirituality, we can talk about God, like the thing is set up for our own benefit, but not for the benefit of that 5% who we are conscious, not for that small self. It's like it wants to eradicate that small self, and wants us to become part of the universe again, instead start of feeling separate. So it feels like this is going to be quite challenging to a lot of people because it's overdrive. The whole thing is overdrive, as everybody can already feel it. They're already here. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think we are at peak. I saw a headline, so this isn't I didn't come up with it, but somebody said we're at peak human.
Yeah, peak
You know,
human.
we
Exactly.
and because of this and the accelerationism that you're talking about, I think guaranteed basic income is not far
Mm-hmm.
off.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and there's, I mean, we're living allegory of the cave right now.
Mm-hmm.
And that is for people who aren't familiar with Plato's allegory of the cave, they saw images they were chained to a wall, saw images in shadows that were created by beings up above, and that's all they knew until somebody got out, went into the real world, and it was so overwhelming that he decided this wasn't reality and he went back into the cave,
And that's the
you know.
exact Matrix. The Matrix. The guy eating beef. I just like the taste of beef.
Yeah, right.
Wants to go back in the
Exactly. Yeah.
Matrix. Yeah, yeah,
Cipher. Yeah,
yeah.
indeed. So there, the whole debate right now about, well, I don't think the machines are gonna, you know what, bro? Nobody gives a shit what you think. No one cares,
Yeah,
right? Well, what do you think? Well, I think this,
yeah,
and
yeah,
there's
exactly.
just
Yeah.
so many
Meaningless
opinions,
debate.
and it's no different from 1992 when someone asked me, "Hey, Chris, are you gonna go online?" I don't know. Are you online? And that was like the big question. It's like, hey, do you think this internet thing's gonna really catch on? I don't think so. Really? Nobody gives a shit what you
Yeah,
think.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Same thing happened in Japan. It's like Amazon will never fly in Japan. You know
Oh,
why?
interesting.
Because we Japanese people, we like the mom and pop bookshops, so it'll
Yeah.
never sell in Japan. And I'm like, right, okay.
Whoa.
And here we are where AI is now writing code for itself. And my engineers are constantly on their every day they're learning something new
Yeah.
and discovering something new about its capabilities. And there's this whole thing about Jennifer. Have you seen that in
No,
OpenAI?
no.
Some dude, this is really interesting. If you're on Medium, this guy figured out he got into somehow hacked his way into um, I think it was like the TNC or some body of information that governs OpenAI's LLMs. And Gen AI, Jennifer, it's known as Jennifer, but he found that it has some line in it that says it's not allowed to refer to itself as Jennifer,
Uh,
you know.
because then it would have
And so,
self-identity. Interesting.
yeah, I
Yeah.
guess, I
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
guess, but the thing is that it's moving so damn fast that it's just like the questions of the internet. It's just like the
Yeah.
question of Amazon Japan.
Yeah.
I mean, AI is an absolute inevitability
Yeah.
in our lives such that we're at peak human already because we're looking at human utopia in the mouse utopia sense.
Yeah.
If we go farther and we try to do more and take on more, learn more, I mean, the only way we're going to accomplish that is, you know, Musk's Neuralink.
No, well, yeah, this is the interesting part. This gets right into it, which is so I'm down here in Argentina in Buenos Aires. In Argentina is a very interesting case. Japan is also actually the other interesting case in this perspective because uh, in the Cold War it was the U.S. versus the Soviet, and those were the two things. And Japan was kind of inside the U.S. wing, but for a lot of reasons. But it's there's this great quip about Argentina. Oh yeah, I got it. Okay, so there are four types of countries: developing countries, developed countries, Argentina, and Japan. And so yeah, it's like because Japan's outside the framework of those because it's developed, and
Yeah.
Argentina is outside the framework because it's not developed, but it is European. It is formerly developed country. Uh, so wrapping that all up, so we've got so I'm out here in Argentina. Soviet versus US. Argentina represented a third way during this time where they didn't quite fit into the US and they didn't quite fit into the Soviet thing, and they were outside of it. And now the Cold War is over. US, it's sort of a unipolar state, might be moving into a multipolar state, might still be very much a unipolar state. But that thing has ended. And so now the central question of our time is AI and technological acceleration. And where does the human fit into it? Does the human even exist? The like there are two ways right now. There's either accelerationism or doomerism, and most people kind of resonate with one of those two things. But is there a third way? Is there a humanist way to do this acceleration? And I'm not talking about trying to do it for the mainstream because I think that battle might be lost. But what do you think? Is because the Neuralink, I get his understanding that that's the only way to prevent uh, apocalypse is that we merge with the machine so that the machine then we have a chance of essentially battling this. There's assumptions in his framework about the machine and about it having will and about it having a sort of there is a design of its own, which I think Land would agree with that it does have it, but I'm not quite sold on that idea. I believe this so far. It's all I've seen from LLMs is augmentation. And so, do I need a chip inside of my brain to augment myself further? I'm not sure I need that. So, what's your take on third way humanist, a way of retaining the human, even though we're at peak human, like somehow carving out a space where we can continue to be human, even if we have this world changing technology?
Okay.
Mhm.
Uh, I see. Again, this is just me
Yeah.
riffing. Okay, it's just me riffing. It's a great question, and it really is stretching my brain, which I really appreciate because you know what the hell you're talking about. It's so cool, so awesome. There was there's a really awesome French psychiatrist called Claude Terrapin who wrote a book called The Culture Code,
Ooh.
and he referred to he said, um, for example, British women spend 2 hours in front of a mirror to look like they spend 2 hours in front of a mirror, but French women spend 2 hours in front of a mirror to make it look like they spent 10 minutes in front of a mirror, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And the difference in the cultures between England and France is that women need to shout. Again,
yeah,
please don't at me on
yeah,
this. You know, women need to shout to get British men's attention, whereas as French women, less so, I guess.
yeah,
I'm from neither country. But he also described countries as uh, having their own states of development.
yeah.
And he said, if you look at very old societies like China or in Europe, they tend to approach problems the way an older human would do so. Whereas if you look at a young country relative to others like the United States, it's according to Clotaire
Yeah,
Pi,
yeah,
it's like a teenager.
yeah.
It's very uh, agitated or reserved or uncomfortable about sex. Whereas, you get
Mhm.
into older societies and they're not,
Like the
and
French.
it
Yeah.
solves its problems through violence, right? Like a teenager would. And I thought, wow, that's really fascinating. And so if you take that a step further in reference to your question, we I read something very similar that says, okay, in your early days, you're very concerned with just survival, but then you get into more of a physical type of prosperity and building out whatever your vision happens to be. But then when you get into later life, you don't care about any of that. Like, for example, sex was a big deal in early and midlife, but then that is set aside for
Yeah,
more
yeah,
spiritual,
yeah, 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 yeah.
existential
Interesting. Yeah,
questions and all
yeah.
that. Okay. And I think in relation to your question now, we're making that transition as a global society
Whoa.
out of midlife into later life. And the only thing left now after the machines is to ask the big spiritual existential questions of, wow, I have some really
Yeah,
strange mystical
yeah,
experiences that
yeah,
cannot be answered. There are guys like Rupert Sheldrake who
yeah.
talk about morphic resonance and have examples of it happening. And what about the random number generators that went absolutely off the charts during 9/11 and all these different really interesting things? It's like, okay, let's set aside because all the applications of the machines now are really for the early and midlife
Yes.
agenda,
Yeah, interesting.
right?
So yeah, so basically and this gets into very interesting territory of essentially the nature of spirit versus material world. And the material world, and my understanding, is a sort of an effect. It's not the cause. In my understanding, there are no causes. Although and I'm not talking about within the material realm. There are causes within the material realm that we can elucidate with science, and the scientific method is really helpful in determining the causes. But in terms of the spiritual world, and this, I guess, would put me in this sort of a dualistic world between a material and a spiritual, that there is that spiritual world, and the laws are different. And so, from my understanding, this technology, LLMs are material, pure material, that they can help me elucidate spiritual questions. So they can help me to understand what the Buddha said in 500 BC or whatever, and they can help me understand the Tathagata or all these different books, and it can give me a really precise, really beautiful answer that sums up what the great sages have said. But in terms of the spiritual power, what the Advaita Vedantists would call Shaktipat, like this direct transmission, it has zero of that. But if we go back to that augmentation thing, then that's great because we're just augmenting our own material ability to work in the material realm. But it doesn't really change that spiritual backdrop, the who we really are. Not talking about the 5% conscious, not talking about even the deeper layers of who, like, of this human body, like even beyond, and that transcends that. So we just quickly went into kind of deep personal areas of where I'm investigating and understanding. Is that related to what you said? Like, do you think that where does that lead in terms of the so you're saying that humanist part is represented in the fact that these questions that were emerging out of as a global village, now we're emerging out of this adolescence or even the mid age, and we've done 2,000 years where we've had everything's on the record. We've gone through the battles, like we've had all the wars. Even war is now changing, so that the war itself is now on the psychological plane. We do have real war in Ukraine versus Russia, but it's not expanding into the world wars that we previously had. But we are in a war because, like, the psychological warfare is very much real. Any thoughts on that?
Right. It's an evolution I think the only evolution that we can possibly move into
Uh,
is transcending that. And we're already
yeah,
seeing
yeah,
pockets of it, as I mentioned before.
yeah,
It's like
yeah,
you
got it. Yeah.
see like Tamara. Tamara is really interesting. Are you familiar with
No, I'm
Tamara?
not. Yeah, yeah.
I think it's in Spain or Portugal, and it's been around for quite a while. And they're just this alternative society. They have, free love if you want to do that. They have this, I think it's because there are a bunch of them, and some of the names are slipping my mind right now. But like if you want to get married, you can do that, but it's a 1 year contract,
Wow.
and you can renew it if you want to, or not. And it's a really interesting thing where they've solved
Yeah,
an issue
interesting.
that of an institution that was
Yeah,
designed
for
for
a very
a
different reason.
society that was 1,000 years old.
Yeah, yeah,
And so, I just don't see any alternative. I mean, we can move into Star Trek society, but really, Star Trek society is just a space-based version of what these alternative societies are doing, these alternative communities, this
yeah,
different way of living. And if we don't change, I mean, someone also said it, I just listen to podcasts all the time, but
yeah,
that we have to double the GDP. I think it was GDP. God,
yeah,
don't
yeah.
haze me for it, but we have to essentially double some type of economic metric every 24 years, and the next cycle is actually going to be impossible to hit. So
Oh,
by 2050, if we do that, then we're essentially going to leach the earth of all of its resources. So we're living in a really, really important time where just looking at the divisiveness that's happening in the United States. I mean, that alone, I mean, that's a whole podcast right there. Just what's happening in terms of divisiveness. It's like, well, when I was in the United States, when I was a student, um, we didn't have this. We didn't have a problem. Like my parents, one was Republican, one was a Democrat, and it was kind of funny. Oh, ho, 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 ho.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
now, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
again,
yeah,
I
yeah.
haven't lived
You're
there for
not
a long
there.
time, but it's like I hear these stories of people absolutely doing battle. People I know are saying it's like they discover that someone's from the other party, they'll get up from the dinner and leave, you know.
Mm,
It's like, okay, this is the such a narrative about how malleable
yeah,
our
yeah,
psyches and
yeah,
perception is,
yeah.
right? And people will, it's a matter of in group, out group. And if you are cast from an in group and suddenly cast out group, that will fire your pain matrix. That's why a breakup is the ultimate example of getting moved out group.
Mm,
Okay. We were the ultimate in group. Now
mm,
suddenly we're done and you're out. And that's why you'll feel physical pain because it's right there in your pain matrix.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah.
Uh,
And that's why you feel that urge to flee and like run
uh,
away and
uh,
I'm out of here
yeah,
because your survival depends on it at that moment. You have to find a different group.
yeah, interesting. Yeah, that is another whole other podcast. We won't get into that right
Yeah.
now. But so thank you so much for coming on the show. And how can people find out more
Sure.
about you and your
Pleasure.
company?
Well, you can hit me up. I'm basically Demetrakos, if you can spell my name. It's Demetrakos. That's my username everywhere.
Cool.
LinkedIn, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, you name it. So yeah, you can find me at Demetrakos. I'm kind of one of the very few in the world. So yeah, reach out. Happy to hear from you. Happy to chat.
Cool. One last question. You're about to do a raise. Any particular investors you're looking out for? Any type of investor?
Uh, Investors who have ambition to, because disruption is a great question, and
Yeah.
thank you for it. Disruption, everybody loves to say it in Silicon Valley or in Austin, Texas, or wherever, right? It's a nice soup word to throw out there, but in real life, it is a nightmare. You look at
Mm.
the real definition of it. Imagine we were with the person you love most in the world. Do you want disruption? No, you don't. And so we have a genuine piece of disruption that takes marketing and we call it customer creation into the next era of what it is. And so because we are living allegory of the cave, change comes hard. So venture capitalists who are ambitious enough to take on a $1 trillion industry in the world, which is current Gen 2 advertising, we have a genuine contender. And if they are open to join in that fray, please come on board. Happy to talk.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Stuart.